This is always categorized as a genre or a subgenre, and I've always labeled it that way as well. It wasn't until like I started prepping for this podcast earlier today, I'm like, and I'm thinking the same dilemma we had when we were talking about film noir, where it's just like, well, people try to include all these other films, these crime films that weren't technically film noirs. And I see movies like Coolie High. Coolie High is a drama. It's not just because it's a black cast. It's not a blaxploitation. And it made me realize like film noir and blaxploitation, they're more film movements that are synonymous with a time and a place rather than a genre that you can continue like implementing films in. Because much like film noir, where you have mystery, you have detective films. Those are the subgenres within that crime genre that those film noir films are, and it's the same thing with this. With like, blaxploitation covers a ton of genres and subgenres. Actually, I think most of them are action and crime, and I think, at least in my opinion, I wasn't, I'm old, but I'm not that old to know when these movies actually came out. But I think part of that is you had like a black community that wanted to see black heroes on screen. And when I thought about it, it was almost like Black Panther, where you had all these Marvel movies that's taking everyone by storm and they're so popular. And then when Black Panther came out, it was just like this huge thing. It was like, oh my God, now we have a black superhero. And I think that's kind of what Shaft was when it came out in 71. I think it was the one in 1970, Cotton Comes to Harlem, that was technically the first, but it didn't really propel the movement. It was more so that fit into what the movement became. Seeing Shaft, I think, on the big screen really made black people think, oh my God, like, yeah, that guy's like, he's like James Bond. He's like Captain Kirk. He's the hero that like always gets the last line, the coolest guy in the room, gets the girl, wisecracks the bad guy. That's the guy, I want to be like him. The girls want him. And I think that's kind of what those action hero stars ended up becoming, and there were a ton of them. Richard Roundtree would not be like synonymous with the action hero, even though he was the first. There were several that we'll get into later, I'm sure. And I think the other one was the crime films, because there's obviously a lot of crime in the black community. There's a lot of reasons for it. Over policing, under policing, which both can lead to a lot of crime, and also less opportunities for blacks, especially at that time. So it was disproportionate how poor blacks were. And a lot of these films really took place in the inner city, in just a couple of cities, most of it Harlem. So I think those were the two genres that really stuck out.
Well, I heard somebody say that film noir isn't so much a genre as it is a style. And for the very reason you said, that there's all kinds of different movies that fit into film noir, like westerns, comedies, romances, whatever. And I think the same could be said for blaxploitation, that it does have a lot of different genres within that. There are horror films, there are dramas, as you said. But I do think that probably the action and crime films were the main category of blaxploitation. When we think about blaxploitation, that's really what we're thinking about. And probably that's the case for noir as well. We're really thinking about crime films, not so much westerns or anything else, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it is blaxploitation. So you're talking about two different things. And there is some irony with it as well, in that this was supposed to be a movement, if we're going to go with that, that was supposed to show blacks being independent, standing up for themselves, taking it to the man, And ironically, a lot of the people behind the scenes that were really pushing these movies, getting them out there, were white. Producers, all the money men, the people that really set their genre and capitalized it were white. They put the black people in front of the screens, but they were the real money men behind it. And as much as this movement helped to give Black actors and talent and opportunity in the 70s, which is really when most of this took place, once the 70s were over, when you look before the 70s and after the 70s, we look in the 60s and 80s moving on, until you had like filmmakers like John Singleton and Spike Lee in the late 80s, early 90s, they went back to being the sidekicks and the criminals and the antagonists right after. So it's kind of weird in that what they were all about before and after, and even during, it really was just all fantasy, which is kind of depressing when you think about it in that way. But yeah, I mean, the money men were white and they had the opportunity in this short space of time to be like stars. But Pam Grier, she didn't do much. I mean, she was huge. She was, you talk about like Jamie Lee Curtis, the Scream Queen, and certain like Julia Roberts is synonymous with romantic comedies. Well, Pam Grier, she was the queen of Blaxploitation, and she was, I mean, she's as beautiful. I'm sorry, I know Julia Roberts is a beautiful woman, and Jamie Lee Curtis. Pam Grier in her prime was as beautiful as a woman can get, and she didn't really get any real work after that. I mean, she got some bit parts. I think she was in the Seagal movie. Obviously, Jackie Brown was her big comeback with Quentin Tarantino, and then she did some work after that. But yeah, like the biggest stars in this genre really didn't get a lot of work.
That's true. I was always surprised that Pam Grier didn't do better after sort of the four big movies that we think of her starring in. She really kind of go into supporting roles and stuff like that. So yeah, I was surprised.
These films, there were a lot of the films that really leaned into the exploitation part of the blaxploitation, like Blackula, Blackenstein, Black Caesar, which I think it's like a takeoff of Little Caesar. I think it was supposed to star Sammy Davis Jr., but that fell through. Abby, which is a take on The Exorcist. Black Mama, White Mama, which was a take on the Defiant Ones. These were all like very Black Shampoo, which is a take on Shampoo. I could go on and on, but these are all takes on obviously, popular films. And oh, here's a Blackenstein version of Frankenstein. It's like very dead on and very quick, cheap movies meant to just like churn out, almost like, just a quick buck. But here's someone Black starring in a Black version of a movie you've already heard of. It's already a property that you're familiar with, and here's a Black version of it. And those were cool, and you can like those ironically or tongue in cheek or maybe genuinely. But for me, I tend to lean towards liking the ones that are kind of artistic, the people who took the staples and the things that made blaxploitation what it was, and actually tried to say something within that genre.